Today, we're going to do a long-term review of the Fujifilm X-T4, specifically for videography use. Now, most of what I say here is also going to apply to the Fujifilm X-T3, the recently announced Fujifilm X-H2S, and possibly some of the other Fujifilm cameras as well. I've been shooting client work using the Fujifilm system since the X-T3 came out in September 2018. I absolutely love the quality I get out of this camera. The images look so nice and filmic and rich, and the colors are just amazing, and clients always love how they look on camera. I upgraded to the Fujifilm X-T4 when it came out in April 2020, and it was a much nicer camera, giving me everything I loved with the Fujifilm X-T3, as well as a whole bunch of upgrades, including a bigger battery, in-body image stabilization system, and a much higher quality rear screen. These were all small changes, but they made a big difference to the camera. You might have even seen some of my earlier videos about the X-T4 stabilization system or my X-T3 video rig from 2020. My favorite two things about the Fujifilm system are definitely the image quality and the usability. So for usability, it's so nice to use and operate using these dials on the top of the camera, which are on the X-T3, the X-T4, and a lot of the other cameras, and it just makes the camera more fun to use, and the camera feels really nice in your hand. As for image quality, both the stills and the videos look amazing. There's so much dynamic range and editability in Lightroom, but even straight out of camera, they look great. Often I'll just take JPEGs off the camera and print them out for clients, and the clients are always super happy with them. As for video, the video specs are really overpowered in this camera compared to some of the competition at the same price range. You get 10-bit color, 4K 60, 240 frames at 1080p, and just a whole bunch of other amazing features, and just the quality of their video looks amazing. But there are some downsides. The biggest downside to me when shooting video with this camera is the autofocus system. Compared to the latest Sony and Canon systems, it's just not quite as good, and you'll sometimes just find the camera going out of focus at inopportune times. I found personally, after using this camera for a few months, it wasn't even a problem for me. I had an understanding in my mind of how the autofocus system worked, so I'd never put the camera in a situation that it couldn't handle. And on the rare times where the focus did hunt, I just chopped that out of my footage and it wasn't a problem at all. The biggest downsides of using the Fujifilm for video work is the same problems you'd find with most mirrorless cameras. So there's no internal ND filter system that you can use, there's no XLR inputs, there's no timecode support, and there is a 30-minute record limit. These are all problems compared to a proper video camera, but I think the image quality you get out of this and how cheap it is, it more than makes up for the features that you're missing, and those are all things that you can easily work around, so I don't consider any of those deal breakers, and it's a beautiful system to shoot video with. Today, I'll walk you through my two rigs. So there's the smaller rig, which I mainly use on a gimbal or as a B cam or for sneaky run and gun shoots. And then I've got my big rig, which is what I prefer shooting with most of the time. And this has a lot of major benefits due to the way it's built out. We'll start off with the small rig. So this is just an X-T4 in a small rig cage. The only things I've added to the cage is a cold shoe mount to the top and then the HDMI protector to the side. Now I think one of the biggest weaknesses of the Fujifilm system is the micro HDMI port. Now this isn't isolated to Fujifilm at all, but the micro HDMI port in general absolutely sucks. So that's why I got this small rig attachment to protect the micro HDMI cable. This allows me to mount the cable like normal and then secure it in. That way if the camera was to drop or get bumped, I know it's not going to snap the port instantly because it's a very weak port. I use the camera's internal hot shoe all the time for flash photography, so I really don't want to risk damaging these ports here, which is why I always use the small rig cold shoe for mounting any external monitors, wireless video transmitters or audio receivers. This smaller setup is really beneficial if you're wanting to use the camera on a gimbal, for a top-down shot, or for some lightweight run and gun work, especially when it's paired with a smaller lens. Next is my favorite X-T4 setup, which is this big A-cam setup. So the first thing you'll notice is that I've added the genuine Fujifilm battery grip. Now this has three major advantages. The first is that it gives me much better balance. So having all this extra weight down low means the camera feels balanced when I'm holding it, rather than feeling front heavy, especially when you have a bigger lens or a monitor mounted up top. It's also much easier to grab because you have an extended hand grip right here. The second benefit is battery life. So this battery grip takes two batteries, but you also get to keep the one battery inside the camera itself, which means this battery grip literally triples your battery life. This is amazing because it means when I'm on a video shoot, I can just shoot for hours without even looking at what the battery life is. I just load up with 3 batteries and stick in a 256 gig SD card and know that I can shoot all day and not have to worry about battery life or SD card capacity, which really takes the pressure off, which is one less thing to worry about when you're shooting client work. And the third benefit is the built-in headphone port. So this means I can plug headphones directly in and I don't need to use the lame USB to 3.5mm headphone dongle to monitor audio. This might sound like a small thing, as I've never forgotten to pack the dongle and I've never had any problem with it, but it's so nice just plugging headphones directly in rather than having to worry about that dongle. Now there's a few other features I've added to this full-size small rig cage. The first is this side handle. This is the nice wooden ergonomic one from Small Rig, which I absolutely love using. This makes the camera so much easier to hold, especially when you're shooting for long periods of time, and it makes the camera feel a little bit more balanced. The other thing I've added is a Nato rail to the top. This allows me to mount a top handle, which I've mounted a monitor on the top of. I don't always shoot with the monitor mounted on top of the top handle. Sometimes I'll have the monitor directly mounted to the top of the cage, which makes the build a little bit more slimline. I do like having the top handle though, as the camera feels very balanced and it allows you to get epic low angle shots with minimum effort. So with the camera's right grip, this left side handle and the top handle, I feel like I've got multiple options to get really stable, comfortable footage using this camera. I usually shoot with an external monitor. This gives me a much bigger, brighter view of what I'm shooting, as well as all the assist tools like false color, waveforms, vector scopes, and everything else. As for audio, I have 3 different options and they're all from Rode. The first is wireless go-tos. I'll use this with lapel mics whenever I'm recording talking heads, and this allows me to record 1 or 2 people with a dialogue being recorded directly into the video file in camera. The second option is the Rode VideoMic NTG. Now I previously had the Rode VideoMic Pro and I actually really didn't like the audio quality from that. It was much better than the internal mic, but it still never felt good enough. However, the quality out of this mic is really amazing. My friend Daniel got one first. When I heard the audio quality from it, I fell in love with it, so I definitely ended up buying one after him. This is a really awesome mic, and the only downside is that you need to charge it, which sounds like a nitpick, but it's totally worth it. Another good benefit of this mic is you can actually plug in over USB. So some of my other YouTube videos that have screen recordings, I've actually plugged this in over USB and used that for dialogue for the video. The third option is the Rode VideoMicro. Now this is an amazing mic and I love that it doesn't need to be charged or turned on or anything. It's literally just plug in and go. Sometimes I'll use this on my A cam, but I'll often use this on the B cam. That way I get a better quality audio on my second camera, so it makes syncing based on audio waveforms in post much easier. This microphone would also be really good if you were going for a super lightweight run and gun build. I find the audio quality not quite as good as the VideoMic NTG, but it's absolutely amazing for something that you don't need to plug in and charge. One thing I didn't know for the first couple of years that I was using this little microphone is that you need to route the cable through the channel on the mount itself. That will give you proper stabilization. Otherwise it jiggles about way too much. So now onto my favorite bit, which is camera settings. So I live in Australia, which is a PAL country, so everything I shoot is 25 frames a second or a multiple of that. However, just change the frame rate based on whatever country you're in. I love shooting 10-bit video. I feel like this gives me so much more ability to adjust the exposure, colors, and white balance than I would if I was just shooting with an 8-bit codec. I personally shoot 200 megabit. I found this does everything I want it to do perfectly, regardless of frame rate. I've never felt the need to up it more based on what I'm seeing when I'm looking at the footage in post, and I've never knocked it down, even though I'm sure it would be fine at 100 megabit if you're shooting something static like a talking head. Even in fast-paced action, 200 megabits seems to work perfectly. Regardless of what camera system I'm shooting with, I always shoot log. So on Fuji, that's FLOG. Now this is so good because it means in post, I can play with the colors and exposure a lot more than I could if the colors were baked in. And adding a LUT is no extra effort when you're already editing the video anyway. Sometimes I've thought I've had the perfect shot and then found in post that I really need to make some adjustments, and been super grateful that it was 10-bit log rather than a more limited codec that would limit my options. As for LUTs, I just use the Eterna LUT downloaded from the Fujifilm website, and this always looks great. Sometimes I'll play with the colors a little bit after that, but it's always a great starting point and I find doesn't require much adjustment. I love the flat filmic look of Eterna. Other times I'll add a bit more contrast to add a bit of pop to the image. Sometimes I'll use a grey card and white balance to that, and the Fujifilm does a great job of that. However, most of the time I'd rather dial in the look I want in camera. So if I'm going for a warmer look, I'll warm it up in camera rather than trying to do that in post. Even though the autofocus isn't as good as the latest Canon or Sony cameras, it's still more than good enough. Almost everything I've shot has been autofocus. Occasionally I will switch to manual focus and it's super easy to use. I'll mainly do this if the autofocus is playing up in a weird situation, or if I'm trying to do something super creative and it's hard to direct the autofocus to do what I want it to do. I always find that using manual focus is a really nice experience on the Fuji cameras, even though they aren't proper cinema cameras or cinema lenses. If you're looking to shoot autofocus 100% of the time, I still think this is a great camera system. Once you learn a few of the quirks and get a bit of experience with it, it won't hold you back at all unless you're shooting really crazy fast-paced stuff. As for lenses, these are my two favorite lenses. This is the Fujinon 16-55 f2.8 lens and the Fujinon 23 f1.4 lens. These are both beautiful and 90% of the video I shoot is with these two lenses. My favorite thing about the 16-55 is the great autofocus and the amazing versatility. Compared to a 24-70 on full frame, this goes up to an 85mm equivalent, so you get a bit more on the long end compared to those lenses. If I could only choose one prime lens, it would definitely be the 23mm f1.4. This prime lens gives great background blur for talking heads, and it's also a great general purpose lens. You can get up close product shots, or you can stand back and get a nice environmental shot, all with the one lens. A lot of YouTubers say the autofocus isn't that good, but I personally found it's good enough for everything I'm shooting. As for telephoto, I really love the Fujinon 90mm f2. I'd recommend using a monopod, a tripod, or a cine pillow or something like that to get stable footage with it. Another great lens is the Fujinon 10-24mm f4 IS lens. This lens does a great job. Whether you're shooting wide-angle shots for real estate, family vlogs, or something else, it doesn't have the same magic the 23 and 90mm lenses have, but it's still a great lens that always produced very usable shots. As for bad lenses, there's two that I'd put on the blacklist. The first is my absolute favorite lens ever. This is the Fujinon 56mm f1.2. I love this lens more than any other lens ever for portrait, but it's absolutely useless for video. The autofocus is so bad that it's just unusable. The other lens is the Fujinon 35mm f2. Now this lens produces beautiful images, and I've never cared much about focus breathing until I use this lens on a couple of jobs. As it's changing focus from forward to back, it looks like the whole lens is zooming in and zooming out, and I just found the shots unusable as it's shifting focus. So it'd be great if you are shooting manual focus or locking the autofocus to one spot. However, if you are doing any sort of focus shift in the shot, I'd consider this unusable. Wrapping up, I think the Fujifilm X-T4 is one of the best video and hybrid cameras on the market. Compared to the competition in this price range, you get amazing photo quality and amazing video quality. You get that 10-bit color, you get internal in-body image stabilization, you get 4K 60, and just nice colors and so many other things that so many cameras can't compete with at this price point. You have to give up a little bit of autofocus performance, and you do have a 30-minute record limit, and there are some downsides, but I think overall, if you're looking at a professional videography camera in this price range, this is the best one to get. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this review. If you have any questions about Fujifilm cameras, definitely leave those below. I'd love to make some more Fujifilm content, so if you have any suggestions or feedback, leave that in the comments below. Thanks for watching, guys, and if you haven't seen it, check out my other Fujifilm videos from a couple of years ago. Hopefully, I'm less awkward now than I was back then. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.